Thank you for coming tonight. We are excited to have you here. Some of you are still taking your seats. I will go ahead and introduce myself. I am Stephanie Smith, the Director of School Counseling here at Ridge. It's my pleasure every day to work alongside the school counselors who take great care of your kids and who will be there for you and your child throughout the college planning process and really their post-secondary planning from here on out. So they are to my right. I thank them for being here tonight. Our presenters this evening are Mrs. Capozzi and Ms. Cahill. And a few things, just kind of housekeeping items. I will ask that you refrain from taking pictures of folks and kind of having your cell phone up. It's hard for presenters to present when that's happening. And I do want to assure you, though, that everything will be posted online. The presentation itself is being video recorded, so there'll be the video format. The PowerPoint will be online on our website, and as well as the survey at the end. So please do complete the survey at the end. We are looking forward to your feedback, and we'll appreciate anything that you have to say. So without further ado, I will let Ms. Cahill take it away.
Good evening. Thanks for coming tonight. I do want to warn you in advance, like I did with any of your students that were in my presentation this morning, or the one with Mrs. Capozzi. I am dealing with learning how to talk after having had braces put on 2 days ago. So as I explained to your kids, this is a whole new process. I also gave them a helpful PSA that you should always wear your retainers, like for the rest of your life. So you're welcome. So bear with me as I learn how to speak all over again. Okay, we wanted to share with you something that we shared with your students this morning. We are really focusing on student wellness and teaching students about how to exercise self-care and explaining what self-care is. And as we've explained to them, there are many ways to take care of yourself when you're stressed, right? And stress is life, right? You're gonna have stress in your life. And what we want them to be able to do is to cope in a healthy way with stressors and to understand that stress does not have to be paralyzing and that you can cope with it in healthy ways and that things that you do every day might help you to minimize or to cope with your stress. So one of the things that we have been trying to practice with them is the idea of mindfulness, the idea of sometimes just taking a moment to think about nothing other than breathing, sitting in your chair, feeling your feet on the floor, and being calm. Because as you probably feel, a lot of times we are running around and we are running from one place to another, and your students feel the same way. So I wanted to take a moment to show you and have you participate in what your students participated in this morning. So if all of you who've just come in can kind of get into your seats so that we can start this. So what we explained to them is that they didn't have to participate if they didn't want to, so I'll say the same thing to you. If you're uncomfortable with it, you don't have to participate. But what we asked them to do was to sit quietly for 1 minute, to breathe deeply and slowly, and to close their eyes or to watch the screen. And after 1 minute, you'll hear a bell sound, and then that mindful minute will be over, and we'll move on with the rest of our presentation. Okay.
The more you meditate,
Oh.
the less likely you are to make.
Very true, but we're not going to listen to her right now. Okay. Okay, so again, what we started talking about this morning with your juniors was the idea of practicing self-care. There is actually a link embedded in this presentation which takes them to a link where they can kind of learn a little bit more about what self-care means and some examples of self-care that we've put together for them. You can also click on that link, so this presentation will be available to you on the counseling department website. There are many links embedded within it, but this is just merely one of them. So what we talked about with them this morning was the idea of exploring and clarifying what their post-secondary plans are going to be. So what are they going to do when they leave Ridge High School? So we explained to them that this is simply the beginning of that process and that it is okay if they haven't been thinking about that yet. It's also okay if they have been thinking about that a lot. We explained that that type of thinking can be anxiety-provoking, right? What am I going to do when I leave here? The idea that that is a less structured situation. It isn't a situation where we say to you, here are the prescribed courses that you're going to take each year. Maybe you pick some elective courses. That is a process by which they have to do a lot of self-reflection to decide what makes sense for them, what the right place for them is, what the right program for them is, what their setting is going to be. And a lot of your students, I think, believe that the decisions that they're making about that are so earth-shattering that if they make a mistake, they're going to ruin the rest of their lives, right? Like I hear that a lot from students, the idea that if I make a mistake about what school or what program or what career, you know, that's going to be terrible. So we do a lot of reassuring in our offices about the idea that most of us probably had some ideas our junior year of high school about what we thought we were going to do with the rest of our lives. How many of you thought maybe during high school that you knew what you wanted to do? Okay, a fair number. How many of you are doing that right now? Less than raised their hand before, I can tell you that. It is unusual to know what you're going to do from the time that you're 16 or 17 years old, to follow that path throughout 4 years of college and maybe some years of graduate school, and to continue to do that throughout your entire adulthood. So we really try to normalize for students the idea that they might not know right now, or they might think they know right now, and they might change their minds, and that that's okay. So what's important at the moment is to start thinking to themselves, what do I like to do? What am I good at? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Where might I like to see myself? How do I learn best? So some of these questions are very general in nature, but it hopefully leads them to be able to create themselves a plan, a post-secondary plan, that will be the right fit for them. And if for some reason it is not, the idea that it is okay to change your mind. My students know that I did that. My process was that I went to college thinking I kind of knew what I was going to do. I did that throughout college. I went to graduate school. I began my career. And then I decided I had made a mistake. And I was not going to do what it is that I thought I was going to do. And I quit my job with literally zero plan as to what I was going to do the next day, which, for those of you who don't know me, is nothing like what I normally like. I like to have my ducks completely in a row. And I did not have any ducks in a row, nor any plan for what the row was going to be. I actually called my husband and I said, I quit my job. And he was like, what? So, it worked out. I love what I do now. And I say to them, it will be okay if you decide that you have made a mistake, or not even made a mistake, decided that you might like something else better. It doesn't mean that you cannot change your mind even after you have pursued a career in the area in which you thought you were going to work. We also talk to your students about what they need to start thinking about or working on right now. Developing and continuing to build their resume. So a resume for a high school student looks different than what you are familiar with. It's predominantly activities. It may be employment-based, but it's predominantly their activities. We give them some samples that are on our counseling department website, and they're going to be creating this resume for the purposes of their senior packet, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. We told them to start considering who they're going to ask for letters of recommendation. And if they have no idea, because they don't have that kind of rapport with any of their teachers, that's okay, because it's November. So they have time to work on those relationships with their teachers between now and the end of their junior year. We told them that we want them to start considering a standardized testing plan. Many of them may have sat for the PSAT as sophomores. They may have sat again as juniors. Those PSAT scores will be available to them probably in mid-December, sometime around that time is when they're released. Now they need to start thinking about when they're going to take standardized testing and what makes sense for their lives, right? So not everybody's standardized testing plan is the same. It has to do with what tests they're taking, SAT versus ACT, how many times they end up taking it, and also how their life looks during that particular time of year. They might decide not to take a particular test because maybe they're an athlete and they're in season during that time of year. Perhaps they're away that weekend. There may be reasons why one student will take a test and another student will delay and take it at another time. So these are the types of things that we talked about with them this morning. We presented this junior year college planning calendar. So this is not meant to be the way that things have to be. The idea behind this is to give them some idea of what they can expect throughout the course of their junior and into their senior year. We were really careful to talk to them about the fact that wherever they are is an okay place to be. If they are ahead of schedule, that's okay. If they don't feel like they are on this schedule, that's okay too. It doesn't mean that they are behind. It means that they may just be doing things in a different timeline. So as I mentioned, the PSAT results are going to be available online in the winter, so they're usually mid-December. They'll get an email to the account in which they used to register for the test to let them know that their results are available and provide them with directions for how to log in and get their test results. Within the College Board website, there is also information on how to interpret the PSAT. We talked to them about registering for Naviance. We provided them today with a packet. On the packet was a code if they have not yet registered for Naviance. So they now have that code in case they didn't have it before. If your child's packet did not have a code on it, it's because they've already logged in to Naviance. So they've used whatever email address they chose to use, and they've chosen themselves a password. We explained to them that if they don't remember their login, that's okay. They can come down and see any of the counseling department secretaries and get the information of what their login is, and then the secretaries can help them reset their password. We talked to them about beginning the college exploration process. And again, the fact that that starts with asking yourself a lot of questions, which I'm going to get into in a moment. We talked to them about developing their standardized testing plan, that they're going to start to register for tests, and that their senior year scheduling process is going to begin during the winter months. January 30th is our program of studies distribution. That is when we meet with your students to talk about courses for next year. We talk about any new courses, any new rules related to scheduling, or the process during which the drop ad happens, and things like that. So we'll go over that with them on January 30th. We give them a lot of time during their junior year to make choices, to review the program of studies, to talk with teachers, to think about what they want to do, because this is a schedule that has a lot of choice. Your senior year schedule, your required courses are your English course and your PE course, and the rest of your courses are elective in nature. So you're taking, likely, a social studies, a science, probably, maybe even a world language, but what you're choosing to take, in math, and what you're choosing, my husband would love that, I just forgot that one. What you're choosing to take is elective. So your choice might be different than your peer. So therefore, we want to give them a lot of time to think about that. So we do their scheduling during their junior conference, which is occurring generally in the month of March. So they get the information at the end of January, and they have a lot of time by which to think about what they want to do, to ask questions, to be reflective, to talk with teachers, and then to come in and also talk with us during that meeting about finalizing their course schedule for senior year. In the spring months, they're going to continue their college exploration process. They're going to have that junior conference, like I said, probably in March. Some of them may be the beginning of April. They're going to register with NCAA Eligibility Center if they need to do that, so that's for people who are potentially recruited athletes. They're going to begin standardized testing or continue with whatever plan they've come up with. At that point, we're expecting that they're going to arrange for teacher letters of rec, so they've already thought about who they're going to ask. Now is the time to ask during the spring months, and we'll go over that with them again during their junior conference. Their senior packet, Part A, is going to be due June 5th of their junior year. There is a link for it on the counseling department website. The current link is for current seniors, so we've asked them to wait a little while until we can finalize the packet for the current juniors. And it requires some self-reflection on their part. There is also a parent piece where we ask you to brag about your child so we can get lots of good information about who they are as a person. They're going to be handing in a rough draft of their resume that we've asked them to start working on during their junior year. So that is essentially what the junior packet, or the senior packet Part A, that's due during their junior year will look like. Over the summer, they begin to potentially visit colleges or continue to visit colleges. We explain that summer is an okay time to visit colleges, but sometimes it is nice to see the college when it's in session. That way they get a better idea of what it looks like when the students are there, which is different than when they're visiting over the summer, but summer is an okay time, definitely, to go for a visit if that's the time that they have available to them. They're going to refine their list at that point and make some changes, potentially, maybe add some schools, maybe take some schools off and start to get a better idea of where they intend to apply during their senior year. Many of our students use the summer for brainstorming topics for their college essay and beginning to draft their college essay and maybe even their supplement questions that some schools require. They potentially are registering or taking any additional standardized tests they haven't done. And they can go ahead and get their FSA ID, which is in preparation for completing the FAFSA, which is the federal application for financial aid, which they will do starting October 1st of their senior year. We explained to them that every student should really consider completing the FAFSA because they cannot even get scholarship monies if they don't have a FAFSA on file. So it's important, even if you think you won't qualify for aid, that you still fill out the FAFSA form. They're also going to be asked to complete a senior packet Part B, which is pretty straightforward. It is a finalized list of colleges, so as they're approaching the beginning part of their senior year, we're asking them to continue to refine and finish their list. That is due September 18th. We also ask them what teachers are writing their letter of recommendation so that it helps us to keep track of their documents during their senior year. We ask them to sign a transcript release form and for them to get a parent signature as well so that we can send out their documents during their senior year. So that is what the senior packet Part B looks like, as well as an updated copy of their resume. So when we talked about finding the right college this morning with your students, we talked about the fact that it's a process. And that's why we begin talking about it this early in their junior year, because we want them to spend a good amount of time self-reflecting and thinking, like I said before, about their strengths and their weaknesses, what they like to do, where they see themselves, also thinking about how they learn best. Mrs. Capozzi and I this morning were presenting in a lecture hall, one of the lecture halls that's closed off behind you. We fit about 125 to 130 students in there between her students and mine. And we explained to them that that might feel big to them because normally their class sizes are probably somewhere between 15 and 30 students. So we talked about the idea of, are you comfortable asking a question or participating in some way? Do you feel like you can pay attention when there are all of these people around you? If the answer to that is, I'm not sure about that, this is only 130 people. There are schools in which you will double that or more in a lecture hall setting. And it is really important for them to think very clearly about that and very honestly about that to determine whether or not that is the right type of setting for them. It won't be like that for 4 years as they get into their major classes. Certainly the classes get smaller, but it's an important thing to consider that during your freshman year, you may be in lecture-style classes, and is that going to be the right setting for you? Very important question when you're thinking about the size of the school that you might be looking at. We talked about thinking about the setting of the school that you might be looking for. Do you want to be in an urban setting? Do you want to be in a suburban setting? Do you want a more rural setting? So those types of questions are the things that you begin with, so that as you start to compile your list, the hope is that your wish list and your list of places you're looking at resemble one another, right? The components you're looking for should therefore be reflected in the schools that you're looking at. We ask them to think about the fact that college is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. The idea that just because you get into the most competitive school on your list does not mean that you go. You may decide that it actually, after all, isn't the right fit for you. Perhaps a school that is a safety school offers you a scholarship. Perhaps they offer you an honors program. There may be reasons why students choose to attend the safety school that's on their list over their reach school that they may have been accepted to. We ask them to think about their academic goals this year. We make sure that they are focused on graduation requirements, and it's something that we go over with them during their junior conference when we are doing their schedule for next year. We want them to carefully consider their course selections for their senior year. Again, they have a lot of choices this year, which is wonderful, but with a lot of choices comes a lot of responsibility for them. We talked about the fact that some of the courses that they may choose to take during their senior year are what counselors refer to as singleton courses, meaning there is not a direct level change from that particular course. They may choose, for example, to study AP European History. There is no CP European History. So that choice has to be made with a lot of thought as to whether or not that is the right fit for them, because there is not a particularly terrific solution to what do you do when that class doesn't work for you. And we want them to think about things like that because it's important that they know what they're taking on during their senior year. The transcript that we send out to colleges during their senior year reflects their senior year course choices. And what we don't want to do is to send that out during their senior year and then have them decide to make a change after the transcript has been released from our office. So we try to work really hard with them to make sure that their course selections are the best ones for them. We want to make sure that they understand the scheduling policies and the deadlines in the program of studies, which again we'll go over with them January 30th when the new program of studies is released to them. We talked to them about standardized testing, the fact that likely they've sat for the PSAT at some point by now, either during their sophomore year or their junior year, or potentially both, reminding them that the results are going to be released soon, probably, like I said, in mid-December. We talked to them a little bit about the differences between the SAT and the ACT, the fact that the SAT has a reading section and a math section. The ACT also has an English or reading section and a math section, but they also have a science section. Both tests have an optional writing section. We often get student questions about whether they should sit for the writing section. What we tell them is that not every school requires it. Sometimes it is in fact optional and they don't need to take it. However, they likely aren't going to know that until they have refined their college list. In which case, I think the safer bet, and one of the things I think most of us tell them that the safer bet is to consider sitting for one test with a writing section, so that that way you have it in case the school that you're applying to ends up requiring it. We talked about the fact that the ACT requires students to answer more questions per minute than the SAT, which means that if your student struggles with timing, that test may end up not being the correct test for them. It will, of course, depend on whether your student may be entitled to extended time, and perhaps that's something that they'll consider when they're choosing their test. We talked to them about SAT subject tests, which are required by some schools, few, but some, and the fact that they have to plan accordingly because the SAT subject tests are given on the same date as the SAT, so they have to make sure that they give themselves enough time to be happy with their SAT score before they schedule to take the subject test, because you cannot sit for both an SAT and a subject test at the same sitting. You can sit for more than one subject test, but you cannot sit for both the regular SAT and a subject test during the same test administration. But again, Not every school requires subject tests. It is something to pay attention to as they're starting to look at schools and starting to refine their list. It's part of the planning process in order to understand whether or not that's something that they have to fit into their testing plan. AP exams. APs are generally not considered in the admissions process. I say generally because there are some schools that allow students to use an AP exam in lieu of a subject test, for example. Again, that is a test and school-specific policy that students have to be aware of when they're reading the school's websites. One of the things that we stressed to students this morning is that Naviance is a terrific tool for them. We encourage them to use it. We think it is a wonderful tool to search for colleges, explore colleges. However, Naviance does not contain every bit of information that they will need in the college process. They will need to learn to navigate college admission websites. They must read them carefully to understand things like testing policies, right, standardized testing policies, what tests they need to submit, what financial aid documents they need to submit, what the components of the application truly are. Do they require letters of recommendation? How many? Those are the types of questions that you want to make sure your student is getting answered from that specific college website. We don't want to rely on Naviance, which is great, but there are moments where it is less updated than the college's website. There are also moments where we are less updated than the college's website, right? They change things every year, and every year I get surprised when I look at something and it is different than it was a few months ago when I looked at it the last time. The TOEFL, which is the last thing on the standardized testing list on the screen, is for students who have been educated in another language other than English during their high school years. Those students are usually required by colleges to provide a TOEFL score. It is to show colleges that you have proficiency in English so that you can learn, read, write, speak, for example, in English so that you're prepared for a college education in the United States. So that is for students that have been educated elsewhere in another language during high school. There are some schools that may require a student to sit for the TOEFL if they indicate that their primary language was not English and that they were educated for any length of time other than in English. But for the most part, it tends to be a high school requirement that if they are educated elsewhere during high school, so the first couple of years of high school, and potentially come here afterwards. If your student has questions about whether that applies to them, we're happy to try to help them figure that out, but that is also a school-specific policy about whether or not that particular school will require a student to take the TOEFL or not. So some of the questions that we went over with your students this morning and that are in the packet that they came home with are things like, how do you decide which standardized test to take? So as I mentioned earlier, there are differences between the SAT and the ACT, and just knowing what those differences are makes some students say to themselves, this is the right test for me, and that one probably isn't. However, we do recommend that students consider at least taking a practice test in the other particular type of test. So if they've taken the PSAT, then they've taken a practice SAT. Maybe they also want to take a practice ACT. Sometimes students are surprised by the fact that they do better on one test than the other. When should students begin taking standardized testing? Again, it is during their junior year, but when during their junior year will really depend on your particular student's circumstances, and that is something that we're happy to work with them on. How do they know if they need to take a subject test? Again, that is specific to the schools that they end up applying to. So what they want to do is, as they start making their list, that's something that they want to check into. Do these schools require subject tests or not? And therefore, does that have to become part of their testing plan? Should students take the writing section? I went over that before. How will students decide which test scores to send to colleges? That is very student specific and also very school specific. Some schools do not allow test choice, meaning that they have to send all of their scores. That generally sends people into a complete panic. Please do not panic about that. It is because there are a lot of students who are not educated enough in the process to understand which is their best score. So they might omit a score that they should not have omitted. There are schools that will super score across tests. What that means is they will actually take your highest SAT subscore and combine it with your highest ACT subscore. If you're not really reading the fine print about how colleges do their super scoring process, you might miss that. And if you don't send both your SAT and your ACT, you won't necessarily get the best consideration that you could have available to you. So that is why some schools require students to submit all scores. Not to torture them and be like, oh my God, I have that one terrible test score that I didn't want to send anywhere. That is really not what their modus operandi is. It is really to make sure that students present their best profile. So that is something for them to talk to their counselor about in terms of understanding which scores to send. What are the options for students who are not strong test takers? Well, thank God those schools exist, because I was not a strong test taker and I feel their pain. So if your student is a person with a great transcript who just cannot get their standardized test score to match their transcript, good news. 4 years of your life is actually more important to a lot of places than 1 or 2 Saturdays of your life. So there is an entire website dedicated to helping students who need to find test optional schools, and it's called www.FairTestorg. There are quite a few schools on this list. Some of them are extremely competitive schools. However, they recognize that students' standardized test scores may not always be the best predictor of their success in college. Schools like Wake Forest, Gettysburg, Fairfield, George Mason, George Washington. There are lots of great schools out there that do not believe your student needs to be a strong standardized test taker in order to attend their college or university. So please try not to panic, and try to help your student not to panic if they are finding that their standardized test score isn't where they're hoping it will be. First of all, they're not done yet, so they have time. And secondly, even if they never like it, there are schools that recognize that that is not more important than their transcript and their activities and who they are as a person. So again, the test optional school website is fairtest.org. There's over 1,000 schools on that website. There are some important things to pay attention to on that website. There are numerical indicators sometimes next to the school, and on the bottom there's a key so you can look and see what that means. Sometimes it's that there is a minimum GPA for students to be able to use the test optional policy. Sometimes it's an indicator to check the school's policy because there are some majors for which students may not be able to use that particular test optional policy. It could be, for example, a lot of times nursing majors are not permitted to use test optional process when they apply to college. Sorry, it's just the way it works. There may be engineering majors that aren't allowed to do that either. So there are certain majors at certain schools where they require students to submit their standardized testing. They may also be required to submit their standardized testing if they're asking to be considered for scholarships. The school may say, we'll consider your acceptance, but if you want to apply for scholarships, we need both a GPA and a standardized test score to determine whether you've met that particular prerequisite. So what can your students do for test preparation? So there are private classes and tutors. We do have a list of those on the counseling department website, those that we've become aware of. We also encourage them that they can go and do self-instruction with prep books. They don't even have to buy them. They can live in Barnes & Noble for a couple of weekends and hang out there and take some tests and some practice questions. There are online prep sites, one of which is Method Test Prep. Method Test Prep is actually connected to their Naviance account. So when your students log into Naviance, you won't be able to see it, but the student can when they log in with their login. If they scroll down, all the way down on that website, on the left-hand side on the bottom, there is a link to Method Test Prep. The instructions for your student are that they have to use their login and their password that they use for Naviance, because the Berners Township School District pays for them to be able to utilize Method Test Prep, and it has to connect to their Naviance account. They have to see that it is you who is asking to utilize the program so that that way it doesn't charge them. So they do have to use their login and their password for Naviance. Method Test Prep has 2 practice SATs, full-length practice SATs, 2 full-length practice ACTs, a lot of great practice questions, and they can actually utilize Method Test Prep as a program. So it actually takes them through a course if they decide that they want to do that. The thing that I particularly like about that program is that not only does it tell them why the right answer is correct, it tells them why the answer they chose is incorrect, which I think is really important because they are perhaps choosing a question or an answer to a question where a portion of it might be correct and they were distracted by that portion and they missed the part of the question that made it incorrect. And that can help your student to realize that they may be falling for certain tricks in standardized testing. Mrs. Capozzi is going to take over and talk to you about types of admissions policies.
So we presented a fair amount of vocabulary to your students this morning, and we want to share that with you so that you're familiar with some of these terms as you encounter them throughout the remainder of your child's junior year and into their senior year. The first being the different types of admission policies. Regular decision is an admission policy where your student is going to apply by a specified deadline. They're going to receive a decision by April 1st, usually before April 1st, but no later than April 1st. And there are no restrictions in regular decision on the number or types of other applications that your student can submit. Through early decision, this is a binding agreement where if your student is admitted through early decision, they are obligated to attend that institution and withdraw all of their other applications. The early decision timeframe is November 1st, November 15th, receiving a decision usually in December or sometimes in January. This is a serious commitment that the student is making. They actually have to sign a contract along with yourself and the school counselor. So it's not something that the student enters into lightly and certainly requires further conversation both at home and with the counselor. There are three main criteria that we would consider necessary for a student to utilize early decision. The first would be that they have a dream school. They have a school that is their favorite among all other schools, and that school also has to offer early decision. Not all schools have an early decision policy. So if they have that dream school and it offers early decision, the next criteria would be that moving into their senior year, their transcript and their standardized testing is in really good condition. There's nothing left that they want to prove. They're really satisfied with the progress they've made on their transcript and in their standardized testing. The reason that we say moving into senior year this has to be so is that given the time frame, first marking period grades won't be considered, and there generally isn't time for additional standardized testing. So those really need to be set by the time they're moving into their senior year to consider early decision. The last would be that as a family, you need to be comfortable with the cost of the school that you're considering early decision for. Families often ask us if the financial aid package is somehow diminished if the student applies through early decision. The answer is no. The financial aid package is not decreased because your student applies early decision. However, what you do lose is the ability to compare financial aid packages and potentially steer your student towards the school that is offering the best value because your student will be attending the school that they were admitted to through early decision. So the financial aid package is not altered, but you also don't have the ability to compare various financial aid packages. Early action uses a similar time frame to early decision, a November application and typically a December or January notification, but it's not binding. Students can apply to multiple schools through early action, and there is no obligation to attend if they are admitted through early action. Single choice or restricted early action is an early action policy, meaning that there is no obligation to attend if your student is admitted through restricted early action. However, if a school is utilizing a restricted early action policy, they are restricting your student's ability to apply early at other institutions. There are only a handful of schools at this time that utilize a restricted early action policy, And if your student ends up considering one of them, they will read the fine print on that institution's restricted early action page, because it will vary by institution in terms of the actual specifics of that restricted piece. Priority deadlines are deadlines that should be utilized for your student to receive full consideration in whatever application they are completing. So if this is admissions, then for full consideration in the admissions process, sometimes you also see them in financial aid and housing. So when priority applications are available, your student wants to take advantage of those. Rolling admissions could be considered applications that are reviewed on a first-come, first-served basis. Large public institutions, state schools are good examples of institutions that have rolling admissions. And open admissions is where the requirement for admission is basically having earned a high school diploma or a GED, and community college would be a good example of schools that have open admissions. In terms of financial aid, there are some terms that we want you to be aware of and some items that we wanted to make available for your review. The first is this 11th grade financial aid checklist. This is directly from the U.S. Department of Education. This is not a document that we have created, and this will help you stay on track for the remainder of 11th grade and into the following summer, and then actually into the fall when you will ultimately complete the FAFSA in your child's senior year, October of their senior year. The next term, and the link that we've included here, is the application to the FAFSA, and that is the free application for federal student aid. And this is used to determine eligibility for federal need-based aid. That can include loans, grants, and scholarships. Like Ms. Cahill said, we do recommend that all families complete this form, even if you believe that you won't be eligible for need-based aid. And there are two reasons that we suggest this. The first is that when your child is applying to college compared to the summer or spring, there may be a change in your financial situation. If you have not filed this form by the deadline, the financial aid office at the institution that your child will be attending may not be able to help you and meet the need that you now have because there's been a change in your status. The second is that merit-based aid can often not be awarded if you have not completed this free application. I don't know anyone who doesn't want free money. Grant money, merit-based money is not money that you have to pay back. It's not a loan. So it makes good sense to make sure that you're able to be awarded that money if your child should earn some merit-based aid. The next application is the CSS profile, and this is not free. This is a fee-based application through College Board is who administers the CSS profile. And this is used by some colleges to determine non-federal aid that might be awarded. You are only going to be completing the CSS profile if it is required by the school that your student is applying to, as would be indicated on their college admissions website as part of their application process. Raise Me is a platform where students can enter achievements such as grades, clubs, sports, volunteer work that they've done starting in 9th grade, and participating colleges then award micro scholarships for those achievements, the accumulation of which represents the minimum guarantee of financial aid that your student would receive at that school if they were to apply and ultimately be admitted there. So we mentioned the scholarship list in Naviance here. All of the local scholarships that we become aware of, we house in Naviance, and students can self-select to apply for those scholarships. In Naviance, there is also a national scholarship search function that students have access to. So under the scholarships tab in Naviance, students can begin now identifying scholarships that might be appropriate for them and completing those applications. And they can refine that scholarship search by their grade level. And lastly, we have the opportunity scholarships. Those are new from the College Board beginning for this class, for the class of 2020. So we've linked that here so that your student can explore the opportunity scholarships as well. So the next set of vocab terms that we have relates to the college list. And those are safety schools, target schools, and reach schools. Students often ask us, well, how many of each of these do I need when I'm considering my college list? And the answer is there is no magic formula for how many of each type of schools a student needs, because this is a really individual process. And the way that the college list is composed really varies for each student based on their individual academic profile, their unique interests, and the specific schools in their college list. So this is really an ongoing conversation that we have with your child throughout the year as they are working through this process. We hopefully made it very clear to your child that this was not a task that we were asking them to go home and start working on, just that we were introducing the idea of the college list, of thinking about schools eventually on this continuum, and this concept of creating a balanced list. There is no number, there's no magic number of how many of these that the student needs, because the way that their list ends up being composed, a student that, for instance, might have a very heavy list in reaches, perhaps ends up applying to more schools overall, because to balance that heavy reach end, they end up adding more safety schools to balance that out. On the flip side, if their dream school happens to also be a safety for them, they may apply to a fewer number of schools overall and have less of a need for targets and reaches. So this is an individual process, and the reason which during their post-secondary conference in the spring, we spend a lot of time talking to them about their individual process and their individual college list. I will quickly run through these definitions for those of you who can't read on the projector. The safety school is going to be a school at which the student's academic profile, their GPA, and their standardized test score exceeds the average accepted student, Ridge High School student at that school. A target school is one where the student matches the academic profile of accepted Ridge students in both GPA and standardized test score. And then the reach school is one where the student is going to fall below the average accepted profile, GPA and standardized test score, or a school that admits less than 25 to 30% of their applicants, which would really be a reach for everyone, regardless of their individual stats. So while there is no specified number of each type of school that your student needs, everybody needs safety schools on their list. And these schools should not be an afterthought. These should be well considered. They should be schools that still represent an excellent fit for your student. They should also be affordable. Your child's safety school cannot be the most expensive school on their list for some of the reasons that we talked about before, change in circumstances or a financial aid package that just doesn't come back as you were expecting. So we need to have a safety school that is both strong in fit, reasonable in cost, and a good option for them to fall back on if their process doesn't turn out as they're expecting. So you might be asking, how do we go about making these determinations and these classifications? Enter Naviance, which Ms. Cahill talked about before. These login codes did go home, so if you are still having trouble logging in or your child is unable to do that, your student can come down and meet with the counseling department secretaries and we can get their access restored, or you can email your child's counselor if you are having a problem with your login. If you have a child that has graduated previously, or you have a current student who's a sibling, an older child, and you'd like to use the same email address to establish your account, those profiles of the two children will need to be linked, so you will need to email your child's counselor so that we can take care of that for you. Naviance is a career and college planning tool. Your child will be getting more comfortable with Naviance throughout the year. One of the really nice features in Naviance is that your child will be able to compare their own academic profile to the profiles of prior Ridge High School students who have applied to the schools that your student is considering. So your child will actually be able to see the academic profile, the GPA and standardized test score of the student, and whether they were admitted, denied, deferred, or waitlisted at the school that your child is researching at that moment. So that's how you begin to make those safety, target, and reach classifications. So Naviance is one tool in that process. Your child's counselor also brings really valuable insight to this process and some anecdotal information. So we do spend a lot of time throughout the year talking with students about their individual college list. So what's next for students? A lot of this is going to be content we saw in the college planning calendar. If your child took the PSAT, the results will be released online. You will receive an email about that. Your child will begin working on the standardized testing plan, and by that we really mean answering the questions, which tests am I going to take, when am I going to take them, and what am I going to do to prepare for those tests. Program studies distribution will be on January 30th. We emphasized to your student today the importance, as Ms. Cahill said, of really sitting down and reviewing and reading that program of studies, having a really thorough understanding of any of the updates, the scheduling deadlines, and the policies that are going to impact them, really taking ownership of that process, and carefully selecting their senior year program in consultation with their counselor. We want them to get the most out of their post-secondary planning conference, and we emphasize today that one of the ways that they can really do that is to come to that meeting having a very thoughtful schedule prepared, as well as questions. It's certainly an opportunity to ask questions of their counselor, but we want them to already have an outline of what they're interested in taking for their senior year. So they will then have that student scheduling meeting and post-secondary planning conference between the student and the counselor. They'll begin thinking about college visits, what visits they want to actually do in person. There are also very high-quality virtual tours available now on majority of college admissions websites. So they can also start getting a feel for campus through virtual tours for schools that you either geographically can't visit right now or just don't have time to do visits. And then creating that initial college list. We've carefully selected some further reading for parents, should you want to do that we hope offers some perspective on the parent's role in college admissions and application process, as well as some talking points for further conversations at home with your child. So we have included here 4 articles from reputable college admissions resources that we really hope add value to the conversation for you. So some final thoughts. Please ensure that the email address that both you and your child are using in Naviance is updated, is a working email address and one that you regularly check. Please also, we emphasized to your student today the importance of checking their email. So we're hoping that you can help us with that message, because there is official communication that comes both from the high school end and the college end in regards, through email. So having an email address that they have access to and that they are getting in the habit of regularly checking is really critically important in this process. We also emphasize that this is a student-driven process. It's really important that the student be driving this process and focusing on a plan that really fits their goals, achievements, their passions, that is really individual and specific to them. We shared a resource earlier that will give some concrete strategies and ideas for how they can start exploring and incorporating self-care in this presentation, and we shared the same resource today with your child. Student wellness really is our top priority. So if at any point you are concerned about your child, if they seem like they are feeling overwhelmed, perhaps they are resistant to the conversations at home about post-secondary planning, or you're observing them to be struggling with coping with stress, please let us know so that we can meet with them, we can talk with them, and try to find out what's bothering them and really troubleshoot how we can start making this better. We really care about your child. We want them to move through this process confidently and with their well-being really in mind. And we hope to partner with you in this. So we would love to hear your feedback. We have the link here, or if you have a QR scanner on your phone, if you care to scan this and complete this survey for us, we would appreciate it. As always, if you have any questions that are specific to your child or your individual family needs, please feel free to email your counselor. We are happy to assist you with all of your questions. Thank you.